Today's topic, as you know, career advancement, interview preparation, and strategies. If you have questions of our panelists during the presentation, we encourage you to go ahead and pop them into the chat box. I'll do my best to sort of facilitate that to the panel. And when appropriate, certainly encourage you to go ahead and unmute for question follow-up and dialogue with our panelists. I think that's going to be an important and fun part of the day today. This program, as some may know, is one that Jack Druga had previously orchestrated for the section quite a while back, but it's been some time since we've revisited it, and we're really fortunate that we have Jack back leading this program for us again. So without any further ado from me, just to briefly introduce our panel, some folks who really need no introduction. And interestingly, I realized this morning all three of them are Met PGA Bill Strasbaugh Award winners. And for those that don't know, the Bill Strasbaugh Award is in recognition of contributions to PGA member employment and mentoring. So I guess we did a good job selecting the panelists this morning. First, we have Jack Druga, PGA head professional at Shinnecock Hills, Met PGA board member, and our current employment and club relations committee chair. Mike Suma, PGA head professional at the Sandwich Club. And Jonathan Gold, recently promoted actually to the regional team leader for the PGA of America's Career Service Department. And even though he oversees our region, I know that Jonathan has a special affinity for the Met section. So thanks to the panelists, thanks to everyone for participating this morning. And Jackson, I think you're going to lead us off. The floor is all yours.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is staying safe and healthy through all this. So just a little background. When we did the seminar, late 90s, early 2000s, interviews were a different world. It was pretty much put on a suit and tie, meet with live people, probably play golf once you got further along in the process. But it was a very set way to do things. Nowadays, very different, even pre-COVID. Skype, Zoom, Spark Hire. Those are the kind of things that we deal with now until we get down to the finals. So back then when we used to do it, Charlie Robson, our former executive director, had a great line. He would say to the group, "I'm always amazed that professionals will hit balls for a month after work or before work for a month to get ready for the Met PGA, where they could win $20,000 or $25,000 first prize. And then when it came time for a job interview, they would spend 30 minutes on their cover letter and resume and take a look at the club, and that would be all the time they would spend on it." So we decided we'd kind of take that theme into this and prepare for an interview. It doesn't necessarily have to be a head professional interview. It might be an interview for an assistant's position or director of instruction or something else. But doing your prep before you actually get to the interview would be like preparing for a golf tournament, and learning about the golf course and figuring out my strategy. What clubs should I practice with before the tournament? How can I be as best prepared as I can possibly be? So that's going to sort of be my less than 10-minute talk this morning about a few ideas that I've seen work over the years, how you can do it. So I'm going to refer to my fictional golf club as Hartman Hills in Bridgehampton, New York, which would be down the street from my club if I were applying for a job. So what would I do? I would absolutely positively make a site visit if I had never been there. I'd contact either the head professional or the GM or both and arrange for a site visit. So when the interview came, I knew what I was looking at. I would also try to learn a little bit about who was going to be interviewing me. Am I going to be talking to the general manager, the president of the club? Am I going to be talking to more than one person? And if so, who are they at the club? That's the kind of information that I think can also help you prepare your cover letter. You're trying to learn as much about this job as you possibly can before you even get into the interview. I'd want to know the strengths and weaknesses of the current golf program. How am I going to find that out? Well, I would talk to the current staff. I might talk to the superintendent. I would definitely talk to a member of the club if I knew a member at the club. But I would seek out as many people as I possibly could to try to learn as much about the club as I could before I got there. Very much like if I were going to play a practice round at Bethpage Black for the Met PGA Championship. I would just try to learn as much as I could before I got there. Also, call the golf professionals in the area. If I was at Shinnecock and I was applying for a job at Hartman Hills, I'd be calling the pro from Maidstone, the pro from Noyak, the pro from the Bridge. I'd be talking to all of those guys because they all might have little pieces of information because they're in the area that would help me prepare for my interview. And I'd learn a lot. I learned a lot before I even got there. And I might learn something that would be very impressive to the committee that I met for. Talking to current staff, maybe you know one of the assistants there. Maybe you know someone who used to work there. It doesn't really matter when you start digging into it. Yes, you could go on the internet and find out everything you need to know about the club, but you're not going to learn that. You're not going to learn about the culture of the club or the needs and wants of the club unless you reach out to the people that I just talked about. And again, site visit is so important because you just need to know when someone starts talking about the practice range or where the carts are stored or the bag room. You need to know what that looks like before you get there. And obviously here I'm talking about head professional interview, but you would just, the theme is just do your homework and talk to as many people as you can. Resume and cover letters. I know our panel talked about this. I don't think it's a given. I don't think it's a given anymore. Your cover letter is really important now. What you say cannot be a cookie cutter cover letter. It's got to touch on something that's going to get the committee's attention in your cover letter. If junior golf is a big part of the job that you're applying to, you need to talk about junior golf, your skills in junior golf, your experiences in junior golf. That needs to be in the cover letter. It cannot be a cookie cutter. I hate to say it, but I get a lot of resumes from PGM students or assistants applying for a job. And it's like, I've seen this letter 15 times. It's like just fill in the blanks. Don't do that. Customize it. And you can't customize it until you do your homework and learn about the club. Again, before the interview, I know Mike Swim is going to talk about, once you're in the interview, how to handle that. But mock interviews, I know I've got some of my staff that I used to work with in the room, and we did mock interviews in my house, and we went through these interviews and we critiqued each other, better ways to answer a question, better ways to have eye contact. There's a lot of different ways to answer a question, and there's some that are better than others. And that's what I've learned over the years, just doing these seminars and getting feedback from successful candidates. So that's really it. I don't want to go on too much. I want to take questions, but as we go through this, keep the theme of, if I were preparing for a golf tournament, what would I be doing? And then if I make the cut, what would I be doing? And if I get near the lead in the last group, which would be the finals of a job interview, how would I prepare differently for that? Or what would I do between the third round and the fourth round? How would I handle that differently? And I think John Gold's going to talk to that a little bit. So Jeff, if we want to take questions for the panel now about prep, I'm ready to go.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, if anybody does have any questions, either pop them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask Jack a question. Now, in the meantime, while we're waiting for any questions to come in, I would just dovetail Jack on pick up on one thing that you said, and I know Jonathan can attest to this because we've sat in some rooms together where the committee has specifically referred to cover letters and grammar, spelling, the incorrect, person's addressee's name. In other words, as you use the term cookie cutter, Jack, it was evident that it was copied and pasted, and the person's name was from the last job that this person applied to. Like, I know this stuff is very much common sense, but you'd be, well, maybe not shocked, but it is shocking that for something that important, that these committees would show us examples of some of these, mistakes that just immediately get you into the no pile. So again, pretty straightforward and obvious, but yet uh, it's hard to believe that it could have been that important to somebody when you see some of those mistakes. Um,
Yeah,
question, just
Jeff,
go ahead, Jack.
let me jump in there a little bit, because I'm kind of assuming here that in some of the things that I talked about as far as prep, that you live close to the area that the club is. This could be a job outside of the section. And, first phone call I would make would be the section office. Second phone call I would make if it was in the Northeast is to John Gold, who probably knows something about the section, something about the club. And then I would start digging in with, maybe I know a golf professional in that section well enough to pick his brain about the club from outside the section. I know Pittsburgh Field Club back in the tri-state section where I grew up, was a pretty big job. The PGA did the search, and there were probably, I assume there were probably some people from the Met section that applied for that job. Well, who would you talk to? I'd get the section office first. I try to dig in and see if there's anybody I know that knows anything about the field club. And I would really try to do my homework, maybe not realistic to drive down to Pittsburgh and do a site visit, but maybe it is. I mean, it depends on how much time you have and how serious you are about getting this job. If I got past the first couple of stages, I would definitely make a site visit, because I'd want to know what I was talking about when they started bringing up the club. So yeah, those are the kind of things, outside the section. Just use, get creative, like how, this is nowhere near where I live. I've never been there. How am I going to learn about this club, and how am I going to learn about the culture of this club before my interview? Really, really a big help.
Interesting question here that it looks like is from Sam Wiley, regarding, because as we're talking about sort of the application materials, resume, cover letter, and Sam's question is about, thoughts on when you think that a search committee might prefer to receive additional letters of recommendation as part of an application process, or as part of an application package. And Sam, if you want to, go ahead and jump in there, feel free.
I was just curious, to other guys that have helped staff and former or current staff with job recommendations and helping them find their next move. But, personally, I like to make, again, as Jack has talked about extensively, is the whole research process. And part of that research process is also trying to find out maybe members at your current club, again, if it's an assistant that's looking and so forth, that might have a relationship with a member either on the committee or at the club, but nonetheless, people that are in a position of authority that they may have worked with closely, i.e. ladies golf chair, club president, general manager, all those type of positions. I think there's a time and a place for them to submit a letter of recommendation. And my philosophy has always been to kind of spoon feed those in throughout the process. So some of that is front end. I don't think any committee wants to be inundated with letters, but at the same time, I think they like to know that a club and the membership supports the candidate. And so throughout that process, I try to spoon feed those letters in, and recommend my staff members do the same, to just try to assist the process. But I just didn't know what anybody else had a philosophy or thought on that.
I mean, I'd say, Sam, in my experience, and I think maybe Jonathan too, there's probably not one perfect answer to that. It's going to vary depending, and I think you alluded to it, depending on the committee. Some of them are going to be like, no, we don't want all this extra, work, at least not yet. Maybe we'll get to that, or we'll request that later on. But in another case, it could be the difference maker where they're overwhelmed. Look at the outpouring that we got from this individual. And I think maybe to Jack's point before, some of this is the homework process of finding out what their appetite is, whether I've had contact or other professionals, as Jack said, in the area, as you said, Sam, the candidate might know somebody, so in that sort of homework, research period, they might uncover the appetite for those things. But I think I mean, unfortunately, there's not a perfect answer, but I think the answer is that's part of the homework, is to try to determine, what the appetite is and what the cadence is. And I hadn't thought really that much about your concept, and I love it of, let's have it so they don't forget about you, right? It's like you got early, medium, late, so you kind of hit them ongoing. So I'll stop there for Jack or Jonathan.
Yeah, Sam, it really is. It's a fantastic question. And Jeff, I'm sure you can certainly provide some insight of really what goes on behind the scenes when you talk to the committee and try to lay the groundwork before the hiring process even occurs. But Sam, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm sure Jeff can agree that sometimes, unfortunately, we do get the comment from the committee saying, we've just received an overwhelming amount of support for this candidate. And sometimes that can actually work negatively for the candidate. So the tactical approach in sprinkling in letters of recommendation based on who the committee knows, certainly name recognition. So if they're familiar with another member at another club, is going to go a long way. But providing 4 letters of recommendation off the bat and then hammering the committee for the next week with letters and phone calls is probably going to hurt your brand more than help it. But certainly if you sprinkle them in along the process and have at the very ends a very quality letter recommendation or a phone call, it could certainly put you over the hurdle.
Yeah, and I would jump in there a little bit and say, if you're preparing and you're getting your resume together, maybe not trying to get as many letters of recommendation and focus more on something that is really applicable to the club, like someone that knows the club. I know your club. I'm writing a letter for someone. I know your club. I know the person you're interviewing. This is why they're a good fit, because I know your club needs this or would love to have more of this, and this person has those qualities. That's a lot more personalized than me writing a letter for someone saying, known him for 10 years, great guy, great golf professional, good player, good teacher. That's not customized and specific. That letter that is really customized and specific would go a lot longer, would carry a lot more weight to that committee than just how many letters can I stuff in this presentation packet. And again, if you're not doing your research and you're not learning about the club, you don't know those things. Like I would know more about a club that I either worked at or I had a relationship with the head professor. I would know more about that kind of a place than I would someplace that's not very close to where I live or I've never worked there, don't know anything. So I think to John's point, it's a little bit of a turnoff sometimes when they get this stack of letters. So I'd be a little careful about that one. Just trying to get one that has meaning, that really makes sense and hits home. Trying to get those letters or phone calls. I think that's another, they'll learn a lot more about your recommendation through a 10-minute phone call than they ever could from just a letter.
Really good conversation there on that. Thanks, Sam, for the question. And I guess that we can keep going here with some more questions that have come in. And I think we can kind of combine 2 of them. Carly Peters asked a question about regarding resumes and portfolios. What do you suggest at each stage of an interview? And I think maybe similarly, Sam put in, what should resumes look like in 2021? I think those are similar questions just regarding sort of the, what should the materials look like? And maybe to Carly's point, do you is there an introductory one and then maybe some things that you withhold to release to them as the process goes along? Or maybe I'm sort of anticipating Carly's question, but do we have a philosophy or any recommendations on, like, do you let it all out at the beginning, or do you is less more to start, and then you kind of have some more ammo in the gun, so to speak, as the process goes? And Carly or Sam, obviously, as the panelists comment, if you'd like to jump in maybe clarify that I didn't butcher your question. Go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. I have a portfolio that I have, and I also have like a one-page resume with a lot of details and information. And I always am conflicted, if I am on an interview, which one to go with, either first or second. My background's in speech language pathology, and going through college, everyone said just have your one-page interview. Don't make it complicated to read. Make it very neat and professional. But I've always found in the golf industry, being personable, I think is very, very important. And it's kind of neat to put a portfolio together and see everything that you've done and your experiences. I think that goes a long way too, but I don't want to, just as Jeff is saying, overload with, too many tricks in your bag at first and then going, back to the, one-page detailed, resume.
Carly, it's a fantastic question. I'm more than happy to answer it. I'm sure that Mike and Jack and Jeff and anyone else may have some additional comments on that as well. As far as the resume, the 2021 resume needs to be modern. I think to Jack's point, those that receive a lot of resumes, they start looking consistent, and you really want to set yourself apart. This is just like the US Open. There's going to be one winner. And the more you set yourself apart in a professional standpoint, the better you are. It's a very common question, Carly, is what you should give, I guess, the committee as far as your credentials for the position. Typically, it's really not necessary to combine your cover letter, resume, letters of recommendation, and portfolio all in one package, because if you may exhaust yourself, right? So consider this a race, and it's a 10-week process typically for the committee. And if we're sprinting out of the gate, we're coming with high energy. We don't want to fizzle off towards the end. We want to really hit our stride, what would be in the final interview. Now, with that said, we cater our materials to the committee, just like we cater our communications to our membership. The committee's makeup, and one that Jeff, again, can allude to, is going to be very diverse. You're going to have probably likely the president of the club. You're going to have older committee members. You're going to have newer committee members, because that's the new generation of the fabric. You're going to have women's chairs on the committee as well. Now, if the communication from the club, it's all over the place. It's typically word of mouth. We can have flyers, we can have emails, it could be digital. The recommendation really is to have a digital, whatever you have as your resume on paper that you'll be presenting them, have a digital copy somewhere in the universe, maybe even your own website that also has your portfolio. That way, the ones that are more comfortable using their phone and can say, oh, let me look at Carly's and type in Carly Peters and see what comes up. They're directed right to your portfolio and to your website. So you're kind of stacking the deck for them. The one tip I heard, and I have to give James Ondo credit for this, and it's fantastic. You can probably make or break an interview by how you deliver your portfolio. If you're handing out materials, and Mike's going to talk about this in the first interview, and you're in person with them, their eyes are going to be flipping through pages. James's recommendation, he's absolutely right, is if you are asked to come in person with the committee, send your materials to the committee beforehand. And to Jack's point, if you know the names of the committee members, address each copy of the portfolio to each committee member and mail it to the club. That way, they have reviewed all your materials, and they're going to be asking questions towards your strengths and not off what is a standardized baseline questions that they have. I hope that makes sense. And I'm sure, I don't know if Jack or Mike or Jeff, if you have any other comments about that.
100% on that one, Jonathan. Totally agree with James. All the advice I've ever given coworkers or the interview process myself, always the same, trying to get the names of the committee members, address the portfolio to those committee members, and get them in their hands prior to the meeting, so they're not flipping through the pages and they're paying attention to you.
Yeah, good point. And I think getting back to 15 years ago when we did this, I think it was stock standard answers, that your resume was short and sweet, and that was it. But now you, as the candidate, are asked to know about so many more things than you were 15 years ago. You had to be technology savvy. Your teaching had to have technology. Everything is so different now that, Carly, I think the more you could show that you're skilled at, without being obnoxious in your presentation, I'm sorry to use that word, but you know what I mean? just showing your skills and all the things that we now need as a candidate. I think, you know, that then the committee can pick and choose how deep they want to get into your presentation. But if you don't show that, the committee might not think that you're very skilled at it, and someone could maybe take that as a negative. So you know, club fitting, teaching, all the things now are just so different than it was 15 years ago. I mean, it was almost you know, give a lesson to someone in you know, in the interview was a big deal. Now I can't even imagine what someone would ask you in a head professional interview or a director of instruction or even an assistant's interview about what your skill sets are in teaching. So I don't think there's any downside in putting out your skill sets in your resume and your presentation, and then let the committee pick and choose how deep they want to get into it.
Looks like Andrew Gruce has a hand raised. Mr. Gruce.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Jack, Mike, for putting this together. You know, it's been a while since I've been through a process, but I know when I was going through the process here at Greenwich, Sam and I had a number of discussions about this, and certainly took on the James model of getting the items to Greenwich and the committee ahead of time. But we also discussed, and you know, it was a multi-step interview process, a sit-down interview, a lesson series, et cetera, but also to leave something with the committee at the end. So, you know, first interview, dropped off portfolio, et cetera, ahead of time. But then after the interview, as it was leaving, to leave them with something so that they would have more to digest on me after the case, so that I was staying kind of forefront of their mind that I have more than just this portfolio. And then there was a lesson part, and I provided everybody lesson info as to, you know, typical follow-up things, or here's a sheet that I take notes on during a lesson so that I can provide follow-up, but just trying to stay in the front of their mind. So also leaving each stage of the process, providing them something on the way out.
Really good suggestion, Andrew. And I think obviously demonstrates, you know, the desire and the effort and energy that's been put in to the process by leaving them something. I want to move on, and the questions that are coming in are really good. And I think we're almost starting, Jack. I think we've sort of naturally progressed from the preparing for the golf tournament to now getting into the golf tournament a little, as we start to talk about the interview and, you know, delivering some materials prior to or leaving something after the interview. So I want to make sure that we get to our next presenter here in just a second. But I think there was one more question. And for those that are asking questions, keep them coming. I may not get to it right away because it might fit another part of the program a little bit better. But I promise we will do our best to get to them. But the one other question that came in from Brandon Holden that I think is more of the preparation approach, it was regarding what specific questions should we be asking when trying to learn or find out about a club or an operation? I thought that was a great question. I think it speaks a lot, Jack, to what you had spoken about at the beginning.
Right. Well, it is a good question, Brandon. And if I had the opportunity to talk to the person that was either running the search or a committee member, I would ask them what they're really looking for. You know, what is the club is making a change here, or the club is looking to hire someone new. What are they looking for? What's important to the club? Is it junior golf? Is it teaching? Is it tournament ops? Is it all the above? Which, by the way, it always is all the above. But there's always going to be something that you'll learn, particularly from the person that's heading the search, that is really important. And this is where doing your homework really pays off. It's like when you play the practice rounds, knowing where not to hit it or where to hit it on each hole really pays off because you've done your homework to do that. So, you know, getting back to Carly in the presentation, if I knew that Hartman Hills Golf Club down the road, teaching and junior golf were really important to this position, I would make sure that I would highlight my skills as a teacher and a junior golf person in my presentation. I would make sure that got in there right up front, and I would also make sure it got in there on my cover letter. So, Brandon, those are the kind of questions, and I don't care who you talk to in terms of a member, the outgoing professional, the GM, the president of the club. You've got to find out what's important to the club, because that's what you need to come in there armed with.
Jonathan, you want any additional suggestions that you want to?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I can certainly dovetail on it. You want to eliminate your blind spots going into it. And it's kind of like if you're flying into the club, you want to go in with some radar. So certainly if you have the option to ask a committee member or the professional staff that's there, or even the professional that may be retiring from the club, you want to get a sense of what the general direction of the club is moving forward. And you could assume that because they have a robust junior program, that might not be something that is critical, or they want to improve maybe the ladies program. But unless you ask those simple questions of what's the vision for this club in the next 5 years, where do they want to be? And then also, what are the resources that they have in place that are going to get the professional and the team and the golf operations team there? You can kind of start to put the picture together and say, okay, this is what the scope of the position is. Here's what they're looking for. Here's how I can differentiate myself from the other candidates applying for the position.
Really good. Brandon, if you're there, did you want to any sort of follow-up questions, or are you satisfied with your with the answers? Yeah, you said all good. So I think this is a good time to segue. As again to our golf tournament. We've prepared. We've got our materials ready. We've done our homework. Now we're kind of here we are, with the opportunity to make an impression, whether it's in a phone interview, one of these, right, digital, and I think we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But I think Mike Suma is going to talk to us about sort of that opportunity, right, the opportunity to be in person and in front of a committee and make an impression.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. Pleasure to be involved. A lot of smart people involved here, barring me. But I'd have to say that some of the things that I have written down that I prepared were already covered. But we'll say it again, because this stuff really is about practice and preparation and your research. That's the bottom line. I remember when I was education chairman, I was able to pick up Bob Rotella from the airport when he was talking in the education forum, and was able to have breakfast with him one morning. And I asked him a bunch of questions about, what he does in sports psychology. And he said, this stuff is really common sense. He said, but you have to hear it. So that's exactly what this is. We need to hear it. I'm learning as I listen to these talented people about, that definitely makes sense, and make my notes, because when it comes time again, either for me or a coworker, we're going to say these same basic things. The preparation and the research and your practice, things have changed, as Jack said, and there are things that I've learned about in recent years. The predictive index, the PI, as Jonathan referred to it yesterday when he and I were on the phone. The Spark interview, which I think Jonathan's going to show us a quick clip of one of those, in case you're not really too familiar with those. A Zoom interview, obviously you are familiar with because you're on it now. A telephone interview. I've had telephone interviews where people just called me out of the blue. On that one, if you're in the process, have some notes written down and next to your phone, or in your phone, or somewhere else, because you just want to be prepared in case that phone rings and they're going to ask you a few questions. And then the in-person interview, which we'll cover a little bit now too. Obviously, you want to be prepared to play golf or hit balls, chip and putt. I've never hired an assistant professional without doing that. And the interviews that I've been on, I've played golf with a few different groups. Didn't get the job at Weburn because Wiley outplayed me, but that's just part of the process, and you want to be prepared so you're not stressed out. Common sense things. You obviously consider your dress if you're going to be doing a Spark or a Zoom interview or an in-person interview. As Jack and Jonathan already alluded to, ask questions. Someone's going to call you at some point and say, hey, can you come in and meet with us here and there? And there's your opportunity to get the hot topics right there. And it's, yes, what questions Brandon asked, what kind of questions, should you ask? Just like was already discussed, what are you looking for in your next golf professional? What parts of your operation or your golf program do you see were deficient, or do you want to grow with? What's going on with the demographics of your club? What's going on with the junior program, the women's program? These are all logical, common sense things, but it's just the more information that you get when it comes time to be in that position, you can tailor your portfolio to it. You can tailor your answers to it. Getting the names of the committee people when you're in the actual interview, whether it's a Zoom interview or an in-person interview, and knowing that Mrs. Johnson is the head of the women's committee and directing a question to Mrs. Johnson within that group, it makes it feel more personal, and you got a better chance of Mrs. Johnson maybe voting for you when it comes time to make that decision. Those are the types of things. The portfolio was touched on. I, for one, am not a big fan of the big leather-bound 75-page portfolio, especially if it's got things like cart signs and pairing lists in there. I mean, it shouldn't be fluff, right? I think that put together a portfolio for yourself, and then from that portfolio, pick the best things out of that portfolio to narrow it down, right? So it's kind of like your first portfolio is a draft, and your actual portfolio then would be smaller. Remember, if it's especially a sought-after job, there could be 300 applicants on these things. And these guys and girls who are going through these committee members are going to be flipping through all these things. So I don't know how impressive it is to have something that's monstrous. But that's, again, as Jonathan said, it's person to person. Some people may like that, some people don't. As far as kind of part of the preparation things, widening your contacts within the business, other golf professionals, GMs, assistant GMs. During the pandemic, we've always had a tight-knit group. I must have been on text messages with Wiley Coyote and Andrew Groos and Joe Connerton, because these are our next door neighbors, as Corey Muller, over and over and over. What do you got? How are you guys doing this? How are you dealing with that? So it really tightened us in the pandemic. And people are here to help you. They want to help you. Charlie Robeson, I rely a lot on Charlie. Charlie's still a mentor of mine. I called him yesterday in preparing for this meeting. And Charlie, I remember when I met with Charlie early on, when I was an assistant pro trying to acquire a head professional position, Charlie said to me, don't be afraid to ask for advice. When you ask for advice to someone, they kind of take it as, hey, this guy or girl respects my advice, and they want to help. They actually want to help, and they store that away as, I kind of like this person. So asking someone's advice is always a good idea. Some of the other things that Charlie said, again, common sense, but we need to hear him. He said he felt that more people got jobs with their personality than with their answers. So bringing the energy to the interview, being positive, eye contact around the entire room, right? I've been in interviews where there were 18 people in this room. It's pretty difficult to have eye contact with 18 people, but you just need to make an effort. And if you did your homework and you know who these people are, you can ask specific questions to some of them. As Charlie said, you probably won't get the interview on your first interview. You probably won't get the job on your first interview, but you sure can lose it. You can, they're looking to narrow down the field, so to speak, right? How do we get to the final 2 or 3? So don't be the guy or the girl that gets bounced because of lack of preparation, a lack of energy, lack of personality, lack of eye contact. I remember getting some advice to be yourself, but if you're kind of a quiet, more introverted person, you got to think about that, because if you're quiet in an interview and you're not asking questions and you're not interactive, it's probably not the kind of person that they want, at least in our industry. It may work for certain parts of a club, but Probably not for ones that we're probably talking about today, at least. Going through some of my notes here. The second interview, if you're lucky enough to get the second interview, based on what was discussed in the first interview, you've already figured out what their hot topics are. Some of these things are kind of like the coach of an NFL team, right? So the last coach was a player's coach and he wasn't enough of a disciplinarian. So now they want more of a disciplinarian. Well, you could take it, well, the last guy played too much. We want a guy who's going to be more around and be there for the members and teach more, or vice versa, right? So you learn some of these things. So based on your second interview, you should bring some materials. Loved what Andrew said about leaving them with something. You know, I had a small trifold handout for my second interview, all based on what I learned from my first interview and on the research of what the hot topics are for that club, really what they're looking for, right? Also remember that if you don't get a position, understand that, you know, you made it to the whether it was a first interview or a final interview, you made it to that stage. Most professionals didn't get the job in their first interview because they had to learn how to go through it, especially in today's day and age, whether it's an assistant professional's position or a head professional's position. Almost every club or professional is sought after by other clubs and saying, hey, I know you picked so-and-so. Did you have anybody else that you thought was really good? And that's important because, you know, how you left with them, thanking them for their time, telling them that you learned a lot about their club, that you learned about a lot about the process. If you can get some feedback, great, but just leaving it on a sign that you appreciated them is gonna bring your name to the forefront when they get that next phone call from the next club or the next professional. If anybody has any questions, please fire them out. Again, I can continue to repeat some of the things that were always said, but it's all based on the common sense, doing your homework, doing your research, doing your practice. Loved what Jack said about practicing for the interviews, whether it was an in-person interview or a Spark interview or a Zoom interview. If you've never been on one of those things, get on them and practice them so that you see what you can do. We've done that all the time. I put my wife and my kids through some processes with, I'm sure they were like, again, we got to do it again, Dad. But yeah, because the more you go through it, you're like, oh, I want to touch on this, or I shouldn't say that. And I need to know what my tendencies are of, do I ramble too much? Am I too quiet? Am I not asking questions? The more you do it, the better off you'll be.
Really good, Mike. Thank you for that. And I think while we wait for some questions to come in, and this might be a similar answer, but you know, Brandon Holden's question before was kind of a two-parter regarding, you know, what questions should I ask in trying to learn about the club. He followed up with, you know, any different or any recommendations on questions or thoughts to have actually in the interview.
Yeah, awesome question. We certainly can ask the questions of what are their pain points? What are some things they're looking for in their next candidate? These are all good, and save those in your back pocket. Regardless of what you ask, make sure the last question you ask is overwhelmingly positive. You don't want to leave the room asking the question, hey, what do you need to improve at your club? Then it's kind of, oh, it's a negative talk. For whatever reason, it just doesn't set you apart for someone else. I love the question, what do you love most about your club, right? Then that sparks positive conversation, and they reflect on you as someone that's a positive person they want to welcome. You can ask the question, why did you join? You know, what intrigued you about joining your club? And that's also a positive memory that they have. So you certainly can sprinkle in some questions that are helpful to you and your next steps, like what are they looking for? What are some opportunities they feel are in the golf operations? How are your member guests? You know, how do you feel about that? But then make sure your very last question is overwhelmingly positive, and then you can give your deliverables and obviously thank them for their time.
So good, Jonathan, so good. Thank you for that.
I saw you writing, Mike.
Oh yeah, no, I'm taking notes, believe me.
Jack, any commentary there from you?
I do, and this kind of ties back to Mike's presentation about playing golf with a candidate, I agree with Mike 100%. If I guess I probably have hired some assistants that I didn't play golf with, but I make every effort to try to play golf with them or spend a little time on the range with them and talking to them. One thing that pops up now, and I just can't even imagine a club making a decision on hiring a golf professional or a key staff member like that as it pertains to golf without playing golf with them. So, and really important, it's not what you shoot as much as were you fun to play with? Were you an enjoyable person to play golf with? So we've got Rick Hartman on the call here, and I can tell you that of all my friends, there's no one I have more fun playing golf with than Rick Hartman. And it doesn't matter, we've played 9 holes after work at Shinnecock, and we've played in the last group of the Met Open at Hudson National. Rick was the exact same guy in both of those situations. And by the way, he won that Met Open, but the point is he was the exact same guy. He was just as much fun in that environment as he was. And I realize everyone can't do that, but if you're in a job interview and they're not going to pay as much attention about what you shot in that interview as they are about how you handled yourself. Did you talk about them? Were you fun to be with? This could be our golf professional, and I want to make sure as a committee member and as a selection committee member that they were fun to be with, that they were fun to play golf with. And if you can play golf like Rick Hartman and you're that much fun, you're probably going to get hired at Atlantic. That's probably going to happen. You're probably going to get the job. But that's my point. So now that's a big part of the interview where you just have to realize now that you are really on display and under the microscope about how you are in this environment. Feel lucky that you're on the golf course and you're not in a suit and tie sitting in a boardroom in front of in the middle of winter, but you're out on the golf course. You're in your office now, and you should be comfortable and fun to be with.
Thanks, Jack. And as we're talking here, I'm looking through the participant list, and I know that we have some folks that recently went through this process, and maybe now might be a good time. I hate to single anyone out that wasn't expecting to speak, but your experiences of some of you, I know I'm looking at Pat Gunning. I thought Tyler Jaramillo, I saw his name, possibly Mike Argentine. This might be a good time if any of you are willing to share sort of your recent experience in the interview process and maybe some suggestions that you have, or how those, to Brandon Holden's question, at least the conversations, the questions that you asked that you thought kind of piqued their interest or got their attention. Pat, are you willing to jump in?
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks, Jeff. I don't have a whole lot to add on top of what Jack and John and Mike have already added, but I'll just highlight a few more points. Jack, I've never been more nervous than going through a mock interview with Jack Druga. And it was the nerve-wracking part for me was knowing, hey, if I say something stupid, I have to go sit in his office tomorrow and look at him. And for me, that was more challenging than any interview I sat in with a committee. The hardest thing for me going through these processes, and I went through 6 interviews where I got down to the final 2 or 3 before I got my 7th job. I succeeded. Was just talking about myself. I've never been comfortable really talking about myself and sharing the experience that I had. And I think once I got over that and became more comfortable and confident with what I was saying and how I was approaching it, and I knew my preparation continued to improve, that's kind of what finally got me over the hump. But it took a while for me to be comfortable learning how to speak about myself the right way. And thanks to Jack's coaching and a lot of conversations with John, that became a lot easier for me as an assistant. When I transitioned to NOYAC from Catanset, coming into an interview as a head professional already was a completely different experience because I had done everything the committee was asking me to do or change at their club. I'd been through it. I had experience that I could tell them this is what I did, not this is what I will do. But this is what I've done at my club currently that's been successful, and here's how I can bring it and apply it to NOYAC. So a lot of the same things that have come up so far. Eye contact was really important. Portfolio I thought was good. I mailed it ahead of time, like I have with the other interview processes I've been through. And to a few questions I heard, what would you bring to your second interview, or what things would you have prepared the next time around if you get a final interview? And I would always ask the club for their budget for the golf operation, for their staffing model, just to make sure there were enough resources allocated to implement the plan that I wanted to implement, to know what I was working with, to make sure that I could do what I wanted to do. So getting an event calendar and things like that from the club to understand the events that they run, how many are there, and what level of staff would be appropriate to carry everything out. Again, that kind of ties back into preparation, but for me, it was just being confident in the interview room, going through it a bunch of times, and getting better talking about my experience. That was the biggest challenge.
Pat, if you could stay with us for a second here. There was another question that came in the chat that I think might be a little bit germane. You mentioned sort of your path to ultimately getting your job, and the question here is about how do you overcome lack of experience in terms of years worked, or never having been a head pro before, or the idea of being considered a viable head pro candidate sooner than later. And it just kind of struck me as you were talking about your progression that you might be able to talk on that question. And I'm gonna prep Mike Argentine, because I think you're out there. Mike, when you got the job recently at Reading, that was your first head pro job. So I think you might be a good one to maybe to dovetail and answer that question after we hear from Pat.
I think a lot of it, again, it comes back to your preparation and knowing what that club was looking for, and how can you use the experience you've gained as an assistant to help that club with where they want to go. I think reaching out to other professionals, learning from them, again, learning as much as you can about the club you're going to. And I had interviewed for clubs when I was working for Jack. I interviewed for clubs in New England, in Georgia, in Chicago. So I interviewed at some places that were way outside of my realm of knowledge. I knew nothing about Georgia. I knew nothing about Chicago. And I had to lean on relationships and friends I had from college and through the industry to tell me a little bit about those places. So I think, just having a good network and meeting and talking to as many professionals as you can will help you learn about different areas and different clubs. And for me, it came back to just learning how to talk about my experience as an assistant, whether it be junior golf or ladies golf or men's tournaments. Again, just making sure you get all that experience as an assistant will allow you to talk about it better when you're in that interview room.
Thanks, Pat. Sorry to put you on the spot, but really good stuff and much appreciated. Mike, how about you? Being that, and again, maybe the fact that this was your first head pro job, you can sort of speak to that again, to that sort of having to overcome what might be perceived as, not having enough experience or not having been a head pro before.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I really relied on, and I know Jonathan Gold was here, he really helped me out a ton. When I first got the phone call that I was going to get an interview for the job, I want to say within 10 seconds, he was the first person I called. Said, what do I need to do here? What's going on at the club? What's the background? Just kind of everything that I needed to know to be prepared when I got in that room, I was going to be ready. But prior to that, one of the things that really helped me, I had an interview for a job in Florida that I was really, really wanted to get, but I was completely unprepared for. It was my first interview. Very similar to this. It was very bizarre for me. It was basically a one-on-one interview where I think it was a Spark interview where I just basically got a template question and I had to answer it within 30 seconds. And if I screwed the pooch on it, I had one more chance to answer the question the way I felt was best. And if I screwed that one up, well, I was done. So I was extremely nervous and I totally screwed the interview. But the best thing I ever did was I called the career consultant down there. I said, what can I do better? I know I can do better. How do I get better? She took the time to sit down with me. I drove down to Palm Beach after the PGA show. I spent about 3 hours with her. And it was very humbling. I sat there and I had to watch myself just fight it through this interview. And it was painful to watch, but she gave me the best advice I could have ever had. So when I got into that interview for RCC, I was ready. I was confident. I asked the questions that Jack and Mike kind of went over. And when I asked them, I was prepared for a follow-up question. And, that stuff really helped me. And then when I had to play golf, the second interview was playing golf. I felt like I was in my space. I was in my element. I was ready to go. Because that's really when you're on stage and you need to not necessarily need to perform, but you need to be who you are when you're playing golf, and have a great time doing it. So when you leave that interview, they know exactly who you are and are you going to fit the culture of the club. Lucky enough, it worked out for me. But that's kind of my advice. I rely as much as you can on the career consultants. And Jeff, I know I talked to you a couple of times going through the process too. Rely on your network. And like Jack said, call local guys, do everything you can to get a leg up on somebody. But so when you walk in that door, they know you're the expert. And everybody that's in this room right now, you have to understand that you're the expert. You're a PGA professional. They're trying to do everything they can to make sure that you're not the guy. So you've got to give them every reason why you are the guy, because one small little error, whether you misspeak, can really hurt you. But at the end of the day, if you have that confidence that you're the expert, you're going to probably get through it.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, great point. It's we refer to it as it's a disqualifying process oftentimes, where they're looking for reasons to not give you the job. And really nice point about don't do that. Don't give them a reason. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump into the experience question that popped up. It's going to happen if you're an assistant professional and you're sitting there and you clearly have had no experience as a head professional, and they want to know if you can do it at our club. You've got to not only say you can, but you've also got to tell them why you can. It's not just enough to say, yes, I can do that. Yes, I can hire and fire. Yes, I can handle a payroll budget. You've got to give them a reason to convince them that you can do it. I had this responsibility as an assistant. When my head professional was gone, I was in charge. Those are the kind of answers that a committee is just dying to hear, because if they hear that, now you've never been a head professional, question mark in all their minds is lessened, because you've told them not only that you can do it, this is why I can do it. This is why I'm prepared to do it. If you go into an interview with that, particularly for a head professional job as an assistant, if you go in there with that overall attitude, I'm going to explain to them why I'm the best person for this club, you're going to really impress them with your answers.
Thanks, Jack. Want to move on, but before we get to our final panelists here, there's one more question that I think, Mike, you kind of alluded to this. I think it may have been a Charlieism, perhaps, but Cody Smith asked a question, what's more important, the answer or the personality that you give in giving the answer? So I thought maybe we could kind of put a bow on your part of the presentation with a follow-up on that point.
Yeah, and it's a good question. Obviously, the answer's got to have some substance. I mean, these are smart people that you're going to be sitting in front of, or the professional, if it's a teaching job or an assistant's job. But you're trying to like the person. You're trying to hire someone that that you're going to spend a lot of time with and hopefully be there for a while. Andrew Gruce sent me a note here saying, I always say that interviewing is like speed dating. The committee is looking to marry you for 20 to 30 years. You need to make sure they want to spend time with you and be with you. For example, Corey Muller, who wouldn't want to leave the room excited for him to be their next head professional? It's perfect. I mean, that's actually perfect. One other thing Andrew said that I thought was important. He said for preparation, he has had his assistants work with presentation professionals. They work on answering questions, body, hand, eye motions, inflections, and everything that goes into interviewing, presenting, and selling. Perfect. back to preparation. Might it cost you a couple $100? I think so, but that could be a lesson or two that you give, and you're working on your career for the rest of your life there, or a percentage of your life. So it is about personality. Again, you can't be a fluff answer. You have to have some substance behind your answer. That goes back to, again, to the preparation, which is the bottom line of this whole seminar. Prepare, research, practice, and you'll have a better chance. We just heard from Mike and from Pat, two successful gentlemen who just got good jobs, and both of them just said, Pat said it was his 7th time. Mike said that, he failed. Tom May was a coworker of ours, is the recent head professional at the Weston Golf Club. He went through about 7 of them, and he would come back to me saying, what do I need to do? So you learn as you go, and make notes, stay positive. You'll break through if you're persistent.
Yeah, really good point, Mike. And I'm really glad you said that. There's 2 things I would just dovetail, and I'm probably going to say the same thing in a different way, but when you get to a certain point, whether even if it's the first round of interviews, or certainly as you progress into like a finals, all the other candidates are fully capable of doing the blocking and the tackling, so to speak, obviously. And so I think to the point of Cody's question, and what Andrew just texted to you, Mike, was, the personality is a lot of times what they're looking for at that point. It's who do we want our children to take a golf lesson with? Who do I want my spouse to be with on Men's Day or Ladies' Day? Who would I like to go out and have a meal with? Or take a lesson from myself, or go on a golf trip with, etc. And so I think to your question, Cody, yeah, I mean, it's certainly the answer is important, but I think at some point in the process, it is more than that, because, as I said, everybody is fully capable of doing the job at that point, and it's all a test of who fits the personality and culture of the club the best. And I'll just, before we segue, I want to pick up on one more thing that Mike said, which, and this goes back to Jack's golf tournament analogy. I feel like in my time with the section, I've seen it over and over again. It's very, very rare that somebody is successful at landing a head professional job, or whatever job for that matter that they're trying to aspire to, on the first try. And it's similarly rare where somebody gets into the final group on a, call it a Sunday, or if it's, in our case, it's a Wednesday or a Thursday, in a major golf tournament, and you win. Oftentimes that person goes out and shoots 85, because why? Well, the obvious reasons. It's the first time, you're nervous, you don't have experience. So to those, and I know, Cody, I know you're one of them, to the people on, and there are more on this call, who have been to several finals. Look at Pat Gunning, and look at Mike Argentine, and Kevin Osterlechner, and others that have come before. They kept at it, to Mike's point. And again, I don't mean to make this a therapy session by any means, but take some positivity out of the fact that you were in that final group, that you are in that cohort of individuals who, not one but multiple clubs now, have identified as the top 3 to 5 who they think could be their golf professional. And I think if keeping that in mind and continuing to prepare and continuing to improve, you'll get there. So thanks, Mike, for saying that, because I think it's an important part of what we're talking about today.
Just wanted to add one thing, if I could, Jeff, and just quickly. Jack Truga touched on Rick Hartman on the golf course. Been around for a while. I was able to get paired with a lot of good players. I specifically, and still remember, a round of golf that I played at Wheatley Hills with Rick Hartman. I mean, Rick was obviously a stud player, and I was a slapper, and Rick treated me, like I was a friend. It was one of the first times I think it was the first time I ever played with him. I was a little bit nervous. I mean, Hartman's a tour player and I'm a chopper, but he didn't make me feel that way. And I learned a lot from that. I wish somehow, Rick, you could put a seminar on how to act on a golf course, because it would be beneficial to us and me when I'm slapping it around at 80 or whatever I'm going to shoot it today. And thank you for that, because I've learned a lot from that. Tony Voss is a good friend. He sent me a note. He said, even when you get a job, I think it's important to maintain a portfolio of your experiences of what you've accomplished, whatever. So when your contract comes to an end, let's say, the club decides to move in another direction, you have to resell yourself and you're prepared for that, right? And things are different these days. And we've seen people get jobs and at different ages that kind of surprised us. I don't know what's coming around the corner for me. I hope I'm fine, but I'm sure I pissed a few people off during the pandemic when I supported the caddy program, and I took some heat for that. So I want to be prepared that if they come knocking on my door next year or this year or whenever, that maybe I can slide in somewhere. Druga, if you need a bag room guy, let me know.
Great.
Really good stuff, everyone. And I think just to keep moving along, it's a good time to segue to our cleanup presenter, our career consultant, Jonathan Gold. Thanks, Jonathan. Take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, this is really, really good stuff. And there is so many valuable little nuggets being said that we hope just even a couple of these things that if you're implementing or preparing to interview in the near future will be valuable for you. Cody, that is a wonderful question about, is the answer more important or is the personality more important? And it always goes along with the saying, people will remember how you make them feel, but not really what you said or did, right? So for the same thing that Mike was talking about playing with Rick on the golf course, it's how Rick made Mike feel. Certainly the conversations can be remembered, but how you make them feel is what lasts the longest. And that's really beneficial. The other thing that we're touching on, it's really important, especially for the assistant professionals that are going to be preparing for interviewing for head professional positions. You want to control what you can control, and you want to manage your blind spots. So what are some things that you can control? Well, Pat mentioned it before. You're going to get asked the question, tell me about yourself. So in preparation, you really should have that nailed down. It's going to be a 2-minute dialogue between you and the committee about you. And it's obviously difficult to talk about yourself. A lot of us fall into the trap of kind of giving a chronological order about our resume and our experience, and that's fine, but that emotional connection isn't there. So just going a little bit deeper about what your passions are, maybe a little bit about your family, some hobbies that you've picked up along the way, even your favorite sports team could set you apart from other candidates. And that makes it a little bit more personal instead of cut and dry. And some things that Mike were mentioning along the lines of the interview room, it's uncomfortable. And Jeff, I know is probably before we wrap this up, is going to talk a little bit about what happens when Jeff goes into, and I go into the committee and we kind of brief them. One of the first things that we say is you're hiring a golf professional and not a professional interviewer. So we try to set the tone to not have them dig so many traps for you to fall in, because again, it's a disqualifying process. It's unfortunately what it is. And you kind of have to just outlast it. When you're in the room in person, you could have 10, you could have 8, you could have 4. There's a couple things that you want to consider. When you sit at the table, you want to have your hands probably on the table, and you don't want to have really anything in your hands. For me, I fidget with a pen, and probably you see it if I'm on a Skype or a Zoom interview or recording with you, I'm fidgeting with the pen. And I know that I can't have that anywhere near me, or else that's going to become a distraction. Also, it's important to know the committee members' names before you get into the room. Have a notepad in front of you, write down everybody's name, and then you can address them. You want to make every single committee member feel like they're the center of the room. That way is obviously and going to give a lasting impression. These are some controllables. Other controllables that you have when you go through a video interview, like Mike said, you can prepare and practice. You can set the stage behind you. You probably don't have to have flags laying on the floor. You can have something behind you, usually a neutral background, but you can control your lighting, you can control your camera angle. All these things just go along with the preparation process. Now, I mentioned blind spots as well. For the assistants, what a blind spot might be is experience, right? So anticipate what might be asked and how you can overcome that. So for an assistant, you might be asked the question, how have you handled the merchandising operation? And they know you're not the owner of it, but you could tell a little bit of a story. You could say how you approached your head professional and said that, I wanted to manage my own product line. I saw something that was really innovative. And I went to my head professional. I said, hey, I'm gonna lay out my own money here. I'm gonna manage this product line for the season and report how it does. Like, right, that shows you a lot about your character. You're taking initiative and you want to get better, and you're just doing that little bit extra that sets you apart from someone else, and you're managing your blind spot in that situation. And then also along the lines with budgeting and finances, they know you don't have that experience. They know it, but you can let them know that you have been working side by side with your head golf professional, director of golf, and you're in tune with every single financial decision that the golf operations department makes. And that's it. And you can set the tone. And that's how you can start overcoming those hurdles. And certainly the more you go through it, these questions become more and more frequent for you. We might go back into Spark Hire a little bit. I'm happy to discuss those. As Mike mentioned, it's a little bit tricky, but certainly if you feel like you're going to be approaching an interview, please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to coach you on how to go through that and what a successful one looks like. You have to know that if you are starting to get interviews, your resume is good enough. If you're not even in the interview phase, we need to look at what your cover letter and your resume is saying about you, and then possibly your experience, and if it's matching up for the job. If we're overcoming that hurdle, we're getting to the interview, that's a win. If we're not getting to the second interview, we know right then and there that there's something about how you interview is not connecting with the committee members. And a couple mock interviews will certainly help, or obviously going through other professional interviews at that time will get you over that hurdle. If you're in the final interviews and you're not landing the position, certainly the most important thing you can do is reach out to Jeff, because Jeff is in constant communication with the committee, and he values every PGA member like their family. And without question, we'll ask the committee members, hey, congratulations on your hire. Can you tell me a little bit about the other professionals here that were in the mix that unfortunately didn't get the position, so we can prepare them better for the next time? That's the first step, because if you're in the finals and not getting the position, it's likely that emotional connection. So when you're on the golf course and you come off the golf course, that committee really should be dying to have lunch with you and learn more about you. If that emotional connection is not there, it's just a little bit harder. And it happens. Sometimes, the personality just isn't there. It's just not a good fit. And I think I saw Pat mention in the chat, everything happens for a reason, right? If the personality is not a mix with the committee, it's okay. The next opportunity, you might be a great match. And just know that, and just don't take it as a blow to your ego and self-esteem. On the golf course, you want to be authentically curious. Again, it's not how well you're playing. It's how curious and how engaging you are with the committee members. Are you asking the right questions about the golf course? Hey, I noticed this, or did you do your preparation before? Hey, I saw you did a bunker renovation. Tell me a little about how the process went. How do you feel about the green speeds? And tell me a little bit about your game. Your swing is fantastic. What are some things that you're working on? Take interest in the people that you're playing with, and that's going to certainly go a long way in the final stages. And then as you go through it, you might experience some things. I can certainly share my screen right now, and I will. Mike mentioned the predictive index. This is something that the PGA of America uses, and clubs are starting to use. It's a personality profile. It's not a pass-fail. I promise you that. It just is something that the committees are starting to use to kind of understand the personality of the professionals. Everyone here, and you can't fake the system, and it's okay, and nor should you. Everyone here has their unique personality. You can be an analyzer, you can be a strategist, you can be a captain, you can be an adapter, right? And it's totally okay. But what they receive, and if you go through a predictive index, I believe Tom May did for Weston, this is an analyzer. There's nothing that says anything poor about you, so there's nothing to be afraid of, but this is a person who is intense with high standards and disciplined, reserved personality. Fantastic. And the committee is looking at this, and especially if a general manager is in the mix, they're looking on how to delegate responsibilities to this person and how they would go about coaching this person. If you're taking one of these, they're really thinking about how they can manage you as an employee of the club, right? So if you have to know you're very well in the mix, but don't be afraid of it. There's no wrong answer here. And I promise you, this is a very good thing for you to fill out authentically. So I will stop that. And I really don't have anything else besides that. Certainly we can touch upon different areas, but to Jack's point in the beginning, certainly open it up to Q&A and we'll take it from there. And again, by all means, we're here to help you. Like Jack, Mike, every professional in this section, we all think about it. We're a family. So if anyone has a question, we're here to help. Oh, and I guess the very last and probably the most important thing, we've seen throughout the years that the hire typically gets made not based on your letters of recommendation. They're fantastic and you definitely need them. What typically happens is the committee members will reach out to other PGA professionals in the area and they will ask, hey, do you know Jonathan Gold? And if they say no, or yeah, kind of, that doesn't really send the best impression. But if they say, yeah, he's fantastic. Why is he interested in the position? And you kind of have that little bit of dialogue, that sets you apart. That's usually where the breaking point is. So if for example, if you were Pat Gunning, you're going for the interview at Noyak, of course, you'd reach out to Jack, Rick, Kirk, other professionals in the area, just to let them know confidentially that you're applying and then inquire about any opportunities. And if you don't know them, introduce yourself and kind of just get a little bit more feedback about the facility. That's about it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, really good. And Jonathan, before I let you go, you touched on this briefly, and it was one of a question that was asked earlier, but I wanted to hold it until now. And it's regarding, and we'll see if maybe you go first, and if Jack or Mike have comments, and possibly even Pat or Mike Argentine, having been through some unsuccessful processes recently. But the question about getting feedback from the committee and how that's tricky and not always very easy. And even, believe it or not, and you mentioned sort of us following up with the committee based on our relationship. And believe it or not, that's not even always easy for a couple of reasons. One, nobody likes to talk negatively about anybody, but especially about a group of people that they were splitting hairs, if you will, in terms of making their ultimate selection. So there's often not a lot of like coaching or criticism. It's more like, yeah, we were down to 3 and this one just barely nosed out the other 2. That's the question, and I don't have any great answer other than we do our best to assist in that process. But wonder if you had anything to add, or anyone else, or Pat or Mike, like I said, if you guys have been successful in getting some feedback from committees that you went through the process with.
Pat, go ahead.
Thanks, John. I'll say, I was very fortunate to work at Shinnecock for Jack and Seminole for Bob Ford as an assistant for a bunch of years. And a question that came up for me in a lot of these final interviews was, how do we know you're not going to leave our club for a better job? And I think for me, learning how to answer that question, and I'm sure it applies to a lot of you, was important. And I think I didn't get some jobs because I didn't answer that question well. So again, I had to learn how to answer that question and turn it into a positive. And most recently at Noyak, I got asked the question in my final interview. They asked, how do we know 2-3 years from now you're not going to leave and go to Atlantic or go to Shinnecock or go to the National or something? And I said, well, gee guys, I'm honored you think I'd be qualified to work at those places, and I hope that your feeling that I'd be good at those places means I would be pretty good here too. And just kind of assure them that, hey, I have no plans to leave. I'm interested to come here. I'm excited about what this club is going to be. I'm excited about what I can help you make it. And again, I'm flattered you would think I'm qualified to work at those other places. So I think, and Jack coached me on that question, working for him and some others. And I think that was helpful learning, again, learning that feedback from the committee saying, hey, we were worried that, he might not stay for that long. And as far as me getting feedback, I would, when I got the phone call from a committee member saying, hey, Pat, thanks for coming. Unfortunately, we're going a different direction. I would just ask them directly. I'd say, hey, can you give me some feedback on what I did well, what I didn't do well. How come you guys made the decision you made? And I'd like to be more prepared next time. And you get a lot of different feedback when you just ask the person directly, and most of it is relevant and helped me.
Good stuff. Anybody, Jonathan or Jack or Mike, did you guys have any? No.
Yeah, I really couldn't piggyback. That was really well said, Pat. And if they're vague, which sometimes they might, because it's tough to be critical, especially since the people could be emotionally invested. They may be the ones that voted for you, and they unfortunately were the minority. It all ties back into how you make them feel. Again, they're not going to be piggybacking on how you answered one question. It's really how you presented yourself, and when, at the end of the day, it's what their feelings are, their emotional ties to you, and could they see you as their professional in 5 years, and how eager are they to have lunch with you, after their round, and all those little things.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like, in the processes that I went through, when you got to the final stage, I feel like the committee has already made a decision that they know you're capable and qualified to do the job. And to your point, and then it becomes, how does your personality mesh with, the culture of our club, and are you a good fit? And I remember during my last interview at Catanza, before I got that job, one of the questions that came up was, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, you just woke up, what's the first thing on your mind? And I said to the committee, I said, what's for breakfast? And they all laughed, they loved it. And I was honest and genuine, and that's something that stood out to them after the fact. I remember getting a comment a few years later from somebody on that committee saying, one of the best things that you said was, what's for breakfast? I said, I remember that was funny. And secondly, and John, you can give me props for this. Having your wife or significant other come to a final interview with you, which mine did, was pretty much, my wife Jill closed both jobs for me. I didn't get them. I always like to say she got them for me. So that's important too. Your significant other will likely be invited to a final interview with you to see the place and see the club. And I was lucky to have a good closer both times.
We've got another question here in the chat, and we're shifting gears a little bit back to the beginning about materials and things like that. And Jonathan, I'm going to start this one with you, because I'm not sure that Druga and Suma are going to be preparing futuristic portfolios that are digitally and video based. But that's the question is do you see a future? Sorry, Suma. Do you see a future where there's Jack's offensive coordinator sheet calling the plays over there?
You'd be surprised.
Jonathan, have you heard sort of, in sort of the industry, if you will, of human resource and things like that in this process, have you seen or heard? I mean, it obviously follows based on today's meeting that it's likely where the paper resume and letter will be a thing of the past, and they'll be all like digital and video portfolios.
Yeah, yes, it is a trend, right? And something that we have to be aware of. Now, it also has to match with the club, and some clubs that they may be a little bit old fashioned, like Meadowbrook, for example. Certainly, we can anticipate that a cover letter and portfolio is more than adequate. And something on the digital side of things, depending on the committee, really, right? Why you should know who's on the committee might not be appropriate. But if you look at a club like Hudson National, which has top tracer and they have technology everywhere, you can go through the gate and they know who you are. Hey, that committee may be a little bit more in tune with technology. So, and we certainly have seen some things in the resume where you're submitting your resume in a PDF form. Well, if you submit your resume in a PDF form, professionals can link in their teaching section videos of them actually teaching. And in their references section, instead of giving a name and number and email, which they also do, there's like a video testimonial where this person is on screen for 45 seconds talking about that, you, the applicant. It's the way we're going. We'll probably never go back to where we were. But just be aware that, yes, professionals are trying to set themselves apart from doing so. And, Jeff, I know that we talk about it. You want to rig the deck in your favor. if it's disqualifying process, committees are going to Google search you, and you really need to be aware of what's coming out of your name on the internet. So they're certainly going to see your scoring results without a doubt. They're going to know that off the bat. They'll probably even try to tie into your social media page. So you have to be a little bit aware of what is outward facing. I know clubs that actually will have their daughters or other family members who may be younger try to friend request this person to see if they can go behind the scenes and gain access to your social media, because it's what they do. It's a big decision for the club, but you really need to have that all tied up. Back to my point is, you can rig the deck. So if they Google search your name, make sure that whatever the first couple of results are is something you want them to see. It could be a website, it could be your portfolio in your website with your resume tied to that. It could be all these things that's more in your favor. It's a good question, Jeff. It's something that we probably shouldn't ignore, because it's just going to be the trend. Now, whether we get there in 2 years or 20 years, we're probably going to get there at some point.
Thanks, Jonathan, for answering the question there. I think I saw Rick Hartman raising his hand like this. You know, Rick, there's actually a button you press to raise your hand. Did I see a hand raised, Rick, there? No? Oh, he's shaking his head. No. Okay. All right.
Actually, can I jump in a little bit, Jeff? If we don't have a current question up there, I'd like to shift gears a little bit, because a lot of the things that we were talking about today, we're obviously preparing for a head professional interview if you're an assistant. You know, that's kind of what it turned into. But I would tell you that among the many skills that my friend Rick Hartman has, I think he's one of the greatest hirers of staff I've ever seen. I'm proud to say that I had a hand in a couple of the hires, and never actually been compensated for that hand that I gave, but nonetheless, I helped. And if Rick's on there and he can figure out how to talk on this call, I'd like to say, Rick, when you go out there and look to hire an assistant, what do you look for? That's a different interview. What do you look for when you're hiring an assistant at Atlantic?
Listen, the first thing I want to ask is, what the hell is Spark? I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'll walk you through it. I'm an expert on the Spark stuff. I'll walk you through it when the call's over.
You definitely have to walk me through some of this stuff.
I will.
First of all the words are way too kind so far. Way too kind. And Mike, especially from you, and Jackson. Listen, hearing some of the stuff and where it's gone, right? And where interview process, Jack, when you and I applying jobs at the same time. It's amazing how things have changed in a lot of ways, but it's also amazing to me, listening to all this, of how it's still kind of how it used to be. Because when I look at jobs and I look at golf pros and I see everyone, that personality is the thing that sells. It's going to sell you in the room. It's going to sell you with me interviewing an assistant, right? To who comes across the best, who can deal with my members, who can deal with people the best, who the members feel the most comfortable with. That's what it's about, because we're in the service business, helping people, and they want you around, and they want to maybe travel with you to pro-ams, or want to take you places, out to dinner. So this whole thing about the personality is a huge part of it. Obviously, what you can do in the background and what you can do in your jobs. And again, I think Jonathan said it, listen, if you get into the interview process, you're pretty well qualified for the job. So it's that selling point of, hey, listen, I want to be around this guy. Whether Jack is an assistant sending to me, which he's helped me plenty of times, and I'm sure I've compensated you plenty of times, but that's not the point. I've helped you use your iPhone. That's a big thing. But so that's what it comes down to me, and that's what sells to me. That's what sells to me. And then also when it comes to assistant stuff, I'm not a big advertiser of advertising for jobs. I'll do what everyone talked about. I'm going to call Druga. I'm going to call Eden. I'm going to call McDade. I'm going to call Jeff. I used to call Charlie. Listen, who's out there that might be looking for a job or looking for a change? I want to do my research beforehand, find out who are the 3 or 4 guys, and then maybe find out if they're looking to move, and then approach the head pro that they work for. Hey, listen, I'm thinking of talking to this guy. Is it fine to talk to him? So again, I'm a big one to doing the research. I know when I don't know Mike at all, but when Mike's thing came up about he went through the first interview and didn't do well, and then he went down and got some help. I mean, that shows to me that the guy's willing to work hard and he's willing to figure out, okay, what can I do better the next time? It's all what you can do better the next time, and making people like you. That's the job. That's the job. And the one thing I know, and I don't think it's just my club. At the end of the day, this thing's about them. It's about the member. It's making them feel good, and that's what we're here for. So that's kind of like my thing, and it's the same thing with Jack was talking about assistants and stuff. I want to be around someone that I know is qualified, but also want to know someone that my members are going to like being around. I mean, my members call my assistants to go to dinner. And so that's like the biggest thing for me. So the personality and how you deal with people, saying the right thing at the right time is a huge thing.
Thanks, Rick.
And I have to do more of these meetings because these make Sam Wiley said, he texted me, he goes, are you retiring or this is a love fest for you? What the hell's going on? I go, I have no idea, but I got to do more of this.
Yeah. We'll keep saying nice things about you. And you keep doing what you're doing now as a little bit of a follow-up to it. Rick and I are friends. We're close to each other. Our clubs are close to each other. Our proximities are close to each other. But one thing to remember, Rick said a lot there, and what he looks for, the personality. And your personality is kind of what makes you stand out. So for the assistants that are on this call and are in this thing, realize that when you are at work, particularly at a member guest, and I use member guests because Shinnecock has 2 very large member guests where we have an awful lot of guests coming in and out of our club. You are basically you're interviewing at that member guest. Your interactions with every guest that you see in the course of those 2 or 3 days, or however long your member guest is, you're interviewing. And you can either do something to make you stand out to that guest, or you cannot do something to make yourself stand out. So, what we try to do on our staff is I try to have the guys either starters on the 1st and 10th tee, the guy collecting the scores at the scoreboard, so that there's a little more than, good morning, how are you? It's a couple minutes on the 1st tee explaining the rules, a couple minutes at the scores table, checking your scorecard. I mean, that's giving the assistants time to interact with those guests. And I will tell you that over the years, the guys that have stood out or have said something to a guest that made them remember his name, when that name pops up on a resume at that guy's club and says, hey, you've played golf at Shinnecock or Country Club of Fairfield. Do you know this guy, Pat Gunning? Are you familiar with this guy, Pat Gunning? And Pat obviously made an impression on a lot of people in the years at Shinnecock, and it turned out to be a big deal. It might have been a tiebreaker. It might have been a tiebreaker. So you've got to use that opportunity. Again, to the assistants who are about to start going through the interviews, treat every one of those member guests as an interview. Try to do something during that day to make that guest remember you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Go ahead, Rick. You got one more?
No, 100%. I mean, listen,
Yeah.
like I said, the more you stand out, no matter where it is, the better it is. And that's part of your job, and that's part of the people that really want to be around you.
Really interesting to hear what you said, Rick, right from the beginning, which was, as much as these things have changed, a lot has stayed the same.
Yeah, it really is.
The tools and the resources are different. People's ability to communicate, I think, are obviously vastly increased. But at the end of the day, what's at the core of all this is that, our business is a people business, and, it's how we make them feel, as someone said before, and it's how we interact with them that ultimately, separates these things. But just, segueing back to some of these technological things, I do think there is some interest. I see that Mike Ballo put the question in the chat about, am I able to take that predictive index test myself? And the answer is yes. Anyone on the call is encouraged, reach out directly to Jonathan. Sorry, Jonathan, your mailbox is going to get hit. I saw you had 6,000 unread emails when we were on your screen before. But Jonathan, through the PGA of America, Jonathan is able to offer that at no cost. So that's a very nice service. And I'm sure there's going to be some people who are interested in giving that a try. And similarly, we touched on Spark earlier just a little bit, and it seems like there might be some interest. There or uncertainty about what it is. So I feel like, Jonathan, it probably makes sense to go ahead and just show that 1-minute video and have you explain what it is and how it's sort of risen to relevance here in the recent past.
Yeah. So thanks, Jeff. And I guess Caitlin can start to get it ready. Yeah. So what you're seeing in front of you is regard as a Spark hire. This is taking place in our universe, which was customarily the phone interview. Now that we have the ability to use video as part of technology, and it's more common, more so for the committee's comfortableness with video, that this is the request. You'll see here, this is a video for Chevy Chase. Tom May went through it at Weston. Most recently, Rumson in New Jersey requested to use it. And it's just becoming more and more of the hiring process. The tricky thing is with Spark, you are allotted, so you were given a question, and it's going to give you a certain amount of time to think about that question. You could have 30 seconds to think about it. You could have a minute to think about it. And then you have a certain amount of takes. Sometimes it's one take, as Mike was alluding to. I'm sorry, or sometimes you have 2 takes, what Mike was alluding to. The most uncomfortable thing about it is you're actually watching yourself talk to yourself. That's the biggest shock and awe point for those that are going through it. It's really not easy because you don't know where to focus your eyes. You really are not comfortable. But again, control the controllables. Stage your backgrounds. Make sure you have good lighting in your face. Do some preparation on your phone. Record yourself. You know what's coming. You know the tell me about yourself question is coming. Possibly, what do you know about your our facility, or why are you interested in this opportunity? Practice that so you're a little bit more prepared, and then practice holding your phone up to your face or your computer if you have a camera on it that's eye level with light on you, and you're ready to go. As you see here, the top of this question here is what separates you from other candidates for this position. You have an amount of time to answer it. It's usually 1 to 2 minutes, and then you press stop. On the bottom left portion is the countdown timer. What happens here, the reason why the committees like it is because they're able to review this on their own time. And I know at first the gut reaction is, this is horrible. I'm so comfortable with the phone interview. This is crazy. However, if you prepare and you work on this, you certainly can set yourself apart from everyone else. Just like golf, like some golfers love playing in the rain or tough conditions because that eliminates half the field. Same thing with the Spark. If you're comfortable and you practice it, you're going to actually look forward to this because it's going to be a point for you to set yourself apart. I think you all recognize, or a lot of you will recognize who's on the video here. Sarah Dixon has allowed us to kind of go through her video. This is what it looks like. And this is what it looks like from the committee standpoint when they receive the answers.
Hi, my name is Sarah Dixon. I currently work at the Country Club in Brookline, Massachusetts. And what intrigues me about Chevy Chase? Well, I'll give you a little backstory. So when you grow up working in the golf industry, like I have, since the age of 15, it becomes your sole purpose to work at a top 1% club in America. And when Director of Golf and Wellness here, Brendan Walsh, pulled me aside and said, Sarah, Chevy Chase has an opening and you are ready for this. That is what I've done for the last 15 years. Every move that I have made has been to prepare myself for a club just like Chevy Chase. And when I've done my research, the echoing comment that I hear all the time has to do with the quality of the membership. And so when I look down the road and I look down to the next 30 years, my goal is to be somewhere for 30 years surrounded by the best people. And so amongst many other qualities that Chevy Chase has, it's the quality of the membership, it's the family type nature of the membership that certainly intrigues me the most. Having been at the Country Club for 2 years, our structure is extremely similar to Chevy Chase, just with how our departments work together, the size of the club, and many other ways that the club works together. Thank you for having me on this interview. I certainly look forward to meeting you in person down the road and to the following questions.
Thanks, Caitlin. Now, I unfortunately, at least maybe it was on my end, the video didn't play, but it was just the audio, and I can promise you that it is a video recording of what Sarah is going through, and she's smiling throughout it. She's keeping eye contact with the camera, And there's other certain things that you can pick up along the way. And obviously she had a warm, friendly tone. Her pitch was good. And certainly these are all things because she has practiced this. She's very well rehearsed. Her background looks like it was shot in a studio, right? These are things that you can control. But now that you know this might be coming to fruition, should you be in the interview process down the road, you can certainly prepare for it. So thanks, Caitlin.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yep, thanks, John.
Yeah. So just again, as Jonathan said, that video is animated, and I think, you know, maybe being that it was a screen share over Zoom, we had some issues there, but I think it was more than anything to give everybody a sense of what it looks like. The fact that it is that a limited number of takes that you have the opportunity to do, and some of the tips on having it come across obviously the way that you want it to. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. Obviously, we have some time for some more, but would also like to give our panelists an opportunity to have, you know, a couple minute sort of any closing or final thoughts before we depart. Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks everybody for doing this. I'm sure we're going to send something out after the seminar with a summary and also with our emails on there. You know, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're here to help. I guess as club relations chairman, I'm willing to do whatever I can do. If you have my email, you'll have my cell phone, and through that, you know, we can talk live, which is always a little better in my eyes. So feel free to reach out. The things that I learned today in this interview is that love what Rick said. When it gets down to it, it's still the same. It's still personality. It's still a good fit. But the prep to get to that point, what it takes now to get into the last group of the Met PGA Championship is completely different than it used to be. That Spark interview to me was like a sudden death playoff. You know, back when we would get an hour in front of the committee, we had an hour. Now we have a Spark interview or a Zoom interview or a 15-minute phone call to get us to the next point. And definitely has to be a different mindset. You have a very short time to make yourself the best candidate to that committee. You don't have the amount of time that you used to. You're hoping to get to that point because the final interview will be way more in depth and it will be face to face. But unless you survive the front 9 of the first round, you're not going to be around for the finals. So keep that in mind. Learn about all these things. Practice an interview in front of a computer, which is totally different than an interview in front of a live person. Make sure that you are good with the technology. Because the last thing you would want is something on your end following up the technology in the course of your one-shot interview. You know, that would be pretty much a killer if you couldn't handle that. So make sure that you get familiar with that and how to do it. And I just want to thank everyone for participating, and especially the panel. We had Sam Wiley on the call. We are going to do something a little later in the season. We are going to use Sam, and it's going to be maybe tailored a little different format for sure. We want input, and it may be tailored a little more to just the assistants. So there'll be more of this to come. We obviously think it's important. So stay tuned for more of that.
Echo everything Jack said. Honored to be involved. Wrote 3 or 4 pages of notes. Loved hearing all this stuff and continuing to learn. The business keeps changing. Responsibilities keep growing. We need to stay at the forefront. I'm going to say one thing about education. Jerry Coates from Greenwich Country Club was somewhat of a mentor of mine, even though I never worked for him. And I remember when technology first came out, I don't know what it was, 25 years ago, the first kind of launch monitors or whatever it was. Here's Jerry Coates at age 63 or whatever it was at this technology seminar when he was, a year or two away from retiring. And I was like, holy crap, that's the guy I want to emulate, who wants to keep learning, staying fresh, and you got a better chance of being successful in your position or your next position. Thanks, everyone. Learned a lot.
Yeah, I just could not agree more. Just really thankful for everyone to be on the call with one another. It says a lot that Met section professionals are always trying to get better. And to Jack's original point at the beginning, if your career is important to you, as it should be, you should work on that equally as hard as you are to prepare for your next opportunity as you would for your next tournament. So that always improving principle is extremely valuable. And should you need help or guidance along the way, there's a family in the section, and I'm sure every member or any member would certainly go out of their way to help whichever way they can. So please, if you're in need of help or like to get better or any way, just keep improving, and we're certainly here for you.
Thanks, everyone. What a great panel. We're all giving you a round of applause, although we're on mute. And thanks also to those in the crowd that contributed greatly to this. We kind of called on you off the cuff there, so like Pat and Mike and everybody, thank you very much for adding really valuable content to the conversation. I think it was Mike. You said it before that you've kind of been bonded closer with some of the PGA professionals in your community during the pandemic. And I think as a bigger community, we've done a lot of things. This may not be the desired way all the time for us to be together, but I think we're finding it's certainly more convenient than driving over bridges or when folks are traveling in the winter to get together. And I just love the fact that we're talking to one another. We've had more programs that have been better attended this winter than I can ever remember, and there are plenty more to come. So stay tuned to the education, stay tuned to the newsletter. Look forward to seeing you in the upcoming weeks, and I'm sure I would say look forward to seeing you real soon on the golf course, but I'm sure y'all are happy that it's snowing a little bit more today, maybe pushing things back just a little bit. But thanks everyone for participating, and look forward to seeing you again on one of these real soon.